Please be aware that this episode contains discussions of trauma and emotional distress. Please care for your well-being while listening.
Hello and welcome to Frontline, and welcome to our fourth part of our special on Vicarious Trauma. In our final episode, we are talking about changing the system, building trauma-informed cultures. For the final time of this series, my name is David Gill.
My name's Andrew James.
And we decided to finish this series off by talking about the systemic change, the systems, the culture, all of this that is needed and it's necessary for truly responding to this moving forward. Organizations have within their gift to do something really positive about this. But I guess a lot of organizations can struggle to know where to start, or perhaps they have tried things in the past that perhaps haven't worked. So we will be exploring some of the pitfalls that people can fall into, but hopefully a lot of good practice in this episode. So the systemic change needed to respond to this, Andrew, what's your thoughts around this then?
Well, I think as we've kind of discussed throughout this series and on previous series of our podcasts that we've done, I think there has been a systemic shift in how vicarious trauma is viewed in services. There was the quote unquote old school way of dealing with things that I think we can now say has largely been consigned to the past. Not completely, but largely been consigned to the past, where people were, just told to grin and bear it. And if things felt like you're getting on top of it, then, you weren't good enough. You weren't, you couldn't hack it, or whatever the term you want to use is. But I think there has been an acceptance that was slightly outdated thinking, and there are ways in which organizations need to move because they do have a duty of care for employees. So there is that acceptance that, the dial has shifted, and now it's about what form that takes and how far services are willing to go in order to ensure that duty of care is taken seriously.
Absolutely. And I guess this is going to sound really strange considering everything we've talked about and everything we talked about in previous episodes as well. But one of the best ways of responding to this from an organizational point of view, as we will see in some of our responses and interviews a bit later on, is to almost see staff as your tools, as your sort of the bits you need within your organization to make it work, to function. And if they are not cared for, supported, and empowered, you will never do this. So yes, we are talking about this from an empathetic human point of view, but actually one of the things you can do when listening to this is just put a bit of a business head on and think, well, actually makes sense. Because otherwise you lose people, or you lose people's skill set, they drop down, they leave, staff sickness, all of that horrible stuff that we don't want to see. But yet sometimes thinking about purely from a human point of view can miss the business conversation that goes into it. And that's the irony. By looking at it in such a cold business-like way, it does actually benefit people full stop.
Vicarious trauma isn't inevitable, but without systemic attention, it becomes embedded. So what can services actually do? Firstly, you can be made aware of increased risks in staff. From a personal perspective, people with lived experience or a trauma history can be at greater risk, as are those with any pre-existing psychological disorder. Vicarious trauma can also disproportionately affect those who are new into this line of work or are isolated out of work. and have ineffective support systems. People are also at a greater risk if they have experienced a significant loss in the past 12 months.
Professionally, organisations that will see greater impacts of vicarious trauma are often due to staff having a lack of effective line management, a lack of other professional support mechanisms such as safety meetings and reflective practice. Staff are also at great risk if they have a high percentage of trauma survivors in their caseload or who they interact with.
Staff are often at a greater risk when they have no training or understanding on this as the concept due to ineffective training or induction process. Finally, we also see an increased risk from those who are isolated in work, such as a lot of lone or home working without human connection, not just video calls.
I think you need organisations that really want to take this on board. So look, we really want to invest in staff.
This is Dr. Ian Caldwell, CEO of Let's Connect.
Physical health and mental health are two different things. You can't deal with them both the same ways. So there's an analogy that if you've got the body is equivalent to plumbers, and the plumbers know how the plumbing work. And then the plumbers are going to be in charge of how we deal with electrics and electricians. And it's like, no, they're two different systems, two different lots of techniques, and it's just wrong. We need to complement, and we need them both to align. And there is some physical or overlaps, but it's not that simple to say that you've got a condition, you can be assessed. If you've got a physical health problem, you can be assessed. They can do a test, and their test will validate their ideas around what was wrong with you. Mental health, that doesn't exist. There's no test. No one gets tested for anything ever. It is a description. I can say, I'm really sad today and I feel really low. And you can say, you're clinically depressed. And I think, oh my God, I'm clinically depressed. You've just described what I've described, but in a clever technical term. We're no further forward. Actually, we're further away. You could say, what makes you feel low, Ian? What's making you have these negative thoughts? What's impacting on your sleep? Make that list, and what can we do about that list? So trying to help someone in mental health is a discovery. You need to be curious. You need to be open-minded. Think, tell me more. Write the list, and then we'll focus on the list. It's the opposite with physical. We've got some ideas. We're going to test that with some tests, and we're going to come back, and then we'll have an evidence-based approach, which is the best approach for you. So that all makes sense to the physical world. This mental health world, it doesn't make sense. So we need to have really, really good training around that. Not mental health first or first aid mental health. We need to get rid of it. We need to get rid of the idea that the labels are helpful. We need a bit of a revolution in mental health. We need to understand the human story and human distress, which most people do. If you say, let's just talk about this in normal ways that you understand. Most people understand difficulties and distress and uncomfort, and then you can introduce other ideas around that. You can build on the foundations of what they've already experienced. So we need a better campaign around that. Then we need to go into the organisation and say, look, if you really do care, there's a better way of dealing with this. Mental health and physical health are not identical. Your processes need to be different. Your training needs to be different, and your connection to the people need to be different. You can do a lot to improve someone's mental health in an organization. If someone's physical ill, you need to get them to a health practitioner immediately. You need to get out of the way. You're a hindrance to their recovery. In mental health, you're a major resource. You could be the difference, and you can enable. You've got a major role and agency in this. So we're not having that story. We're not promoting that. So it's a way of then saying, and we'll make sure it's legal. We'll make sure that everything's in place, and we'll test. This is done for the right reasons. This isn't done to sack people, get rid of people. This is done because you really care. So I would only want to work with organisations who are committed to really invest in that. So I think there's a much bigger campaign to do about mental health. We don't understand it. We don't talk about the right ways, and we don't have very good training around it. The human condition and the human distress, we need to start to deal with the messiness of life, which most people know because they've been in a family. Most people know because they've been in a complex community and they've seen difficulties. Some people will be better equipped than others, but then we can add on to that. We can have describe it and understand it with language that people are comfortable with and it makes sense to them and they've got a role. That's what we need to do is at the end of it, mental health trait. I know people in university who's been on mental health first aid who said, I'm never going to be in a room with a student on my own again, and I'm not going to have these conversations because now I'm terrified. And these are people who are really capable of caring. Whereas actually, if you do the different training, at the end of it, you think, I'm going to continue what I've always done. I'm going to look out for people, hopefully look out for people a bit more. And then I'm going to connect them. I'm going to pull support in and I'm going to connect them. I'm going to make sure I've got a role in this. And it might not be the main role, but it'll be a role. The other way is, I haven't got a role and you need to go somewhere else.
Ongoing support matters too. Some services offer regular emotional check-ins, buddy systems or wellbeing action plans. Others have access to external supervisors or reflective facilitators.
Dr. Judith Herman says, recovery can only take place within the context of relationships. It cannot occur in isolation. This applies to systems as well as individuals.
There are examples of people who've led a transformation in their service culture, ones that have prioritised safety for staff as well as service users.
I think what's important for people with lived experience and just anyone doing recovery work is space.
This is Iona Roberts, a frontline drugs worker taking the lead for trauma-informed care for her service.
Having space held for people to come and talk about, their feelings, what's going well, what they might need support with, and just an understanding that everybody is human. So when there's stressful situations, or when I've been in stressful situations in the past, team leaders have pulled, and they do this with everyone, they'll pull you aside, make sure that you're okay. Maybe if there's a member of staff that person's closer with in the office, they'll just let them know that someone's struggling so they can go off and have a chat. I've had team leaders rearrange my afternoon appointments for me so that I don't have to do any more client work for the rest of the day. Because it's not only making sure that I've got space to kind of recover from whatever's happened in the morning or whenever it happened. We're not putting those clients that I might speak with later on at the day of risk of being affected by what I've been affected by. Because I suppose in the way that we talk about vicarious trauma, I've also got to, be aware of my mood and my mental state for what I'm taking into appointments. Because depending on how you feel, you'll interpret what people say differently and you could react differently, and you really need to be neutral to have those conversations. But yeah, it's just making sure that people have got time. When I used to work somewhere that was very KPI focused, and I think as a charity that can be quite dangerous because I'm thinking of how many people I can see in a day, how quickly we can get people to reach their goals. In a way, it's pitched as like, oh, if someone's reached their goals with me in 6 to 8 weeks, that's really good. But then recovery cannot be timed, and I think it's difficult on workers and clients to be talking about, oh, like, you want to do this in 8 weeks. It can be good for people to obviously have measurable goals, but yeah. So I used to have my diary booked back to back. I had appointment, booked my lunch in, appointment, go home. I get, there'd be a break if someone didn't attend, but even then you kind of ringing them, making sure they're okay. So I carried that into my position now, and boy, was it difficult. So I moved from non-opiate work to opiate work, and opiate involves a lot of prescription work, so there's more admin behind it than my previous role. So I was very stressed, but my team leader took one look at my calendar and kind of pulled me for a one-to-one and said, are you sure you want to do this? And me being all positive, like, yeah, it's fine, I can do it. And then after a few weeks, I realised that I needed to have space in between my appointments. And that's not only to do your admin work, but you don't know what any phone call's going to entail. So if you have a difficult call and you've booked something in straight after, you're either going to have to cancel it, which can be disappointing, or go into it really stressed. So that was really helpful for me to have that identified, obviously by someone who's worked here longer, to say, yeah, it's probably not the best thing booking yourself back to back. And it's become much easier now that I've done that. But yeah, I kind of thought it was better to see and speak to as many people as I can in a day to get more frequent contact. But if you're stressed during those contacts, it's probably not the best.
It needs to be remembered that there is no quick fix, but there are clear steps. Trauma-informed cultures are proactive, not reactive. They build in space for healing before crisis.
They promote something called self-compassion for their staff. It means that you act the same way toward yourself when you're going through a tough time the way you would act towards a dear friend.
Dr. Lucy Hone is an expert on resilience, and she's explored the secrets of resilient people. One of her key tips is to ask yourself when looking at your coping mechanisms is to ask, is what I'm doing right now helping or harming me? A simple question like this can help you keep yourself safe and focus on self-compassion.
And finally, challenge the I'm fine culture. Ask yourself what this looks like for you and your colleagues. If you are a senior manager, consider how do you know when your staff are truly fine and when they are not.
When I'm having staff meetings, it's an open forum.
This is India Ellis, who has worked in challenging behaviour units and psychiatric wards.
It's not me just telling a group of people this is what needs to happen next, but what is it that you think? How do you feel about it? What works for you? You know, how do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to receive your debriefs? You know, this is what's on offer, but what do you need from me? I think them questions are really important, and I'd like to implement more of that. I'd like to implement, change like the debrief sort of like sheets and things like that, bring things like that in, document and sort of track how my staff are feeling as well, and get to know my staff. I do anyway, but get to know them even more, and anybody new that's coming on board, because when you know them and you take the time to know them, you understand what triggers them when they're having a good day, when they're having an off day. Again, it's all about the relationship, and that's what I endeavour, to do going forward.
And it took me over 30 years to start to recognise my own insecurities and where they were rooted in fear, basically, of and sort of getting comfortable with the fact that I can't be everything to everyone, and including myself.
This is Richie Andrew from Every Man Can.
So that's something that I need to remind myself sometimes. I might be really well and forget the things that I do. And so if I haven't written them down and forget the things that really work for me, then I can become, I'm at risk of that vulnerability again. So having been really conscious, bringing into my consciousness the things that work for me, to, sharing where I'm at, listening to what other people have got to say, and being open to help and support. I don't think you get through anything in life. And I think that's another thing is we've got a lot of men out there who are sharing their stories, and a huge theme of it is that they reached out for help, but they didn't try and do it all themselves. That masculine thing of trying to hey, I can deal with this and so on. It's like, yeah, we get through life with tapping that feminine energy where we basically connect with each other and help each other as well. And so most people will be surrounded by some people who, if they thought they were struggling, would be the first people to jump in and help if they ask for it as well. So I just being that openness to asking for it can be a huge factor. It's difficult to measure the tangible outcomes, but you can measure it actually. There's several different ways of measuring it. The most simple one, of course, is the Office of National Statistics Wellbeing 4. So the Wellbeing 4, these are questions that were established back in 2011 that they've been using nationally, within their national surveys to understand how people are doing in wellbeing. In a workplace, you can do that periodically. You could even do it one-to-ones in appraisals and actually monitor that over a period of time to keep getting touch points and see why people are coping. The organisations have access to the stress management tools that Health and Safety Executive provides. 6 different areas of stress, but a lot of organisations trip up when it comes to then what to do about that as well. Like, what tools have they got? So they might measure it and have that conversation, but if it's organisationally, how much have they got, in terms of like the pressure on the job or the expectations within the job and someone's current level of vulnerability and how much they can currently deal with? Actually, you've got a job to be done. So how do organisations, then use that tool properly to provide equity in terms of people's like needs for their vulnerability? That's not an easy one to do. A lot of organisations aren't keen on giving people different treatment, for example, when actually in a world where we want equity, then that's what we need to do at different times, is actually give people different flexibilities as well. And maybe even like another one is about obviously changing their jobs, but back to measures as well. I think having those open conversations, having appraisals, that's kind of what those one-to-ones, just conversations where the first thing is how are you doing, and then how are you coping with things, how do you need support in terms of the knowledge and the ability to do your job. But then that's where it comes back down to the individual, because it's like, well, how willing are people to acknowledge that they're struggling?
Do not work over your expected time. At the end of the day, if it isn't finished, it isn't finished. There's another day.
This is Anita Hemmings, who works with young adults.
Yeah, tomorrow we'll be there. Make sure, you've got to think of me time, and it's that work-life balance, that kind of thing. And never be afraid to say what is going on with you. You need to make sure you have your regular check-ins with your manager, just like how I get the staff to do with me. They need to be able to feel safe to come and speak with me about whatever's going on for them. That's what they need to make sure they do. And I always say, never be afraid to ask a question, because it's how you learn, at the end of the day. But you have to think about your own well-being, which is what most of us don't do these days.
But my big thing is that we can't rescue people. I always say that. We support people, and the people that we support in the community in particular have probably lived the lives they've lived for a long time.
This is Amanda Chalmers, a trauma-informed consultant from Be Informed.
That it's their normal, they're used to it, and they're quite good at it. They're quite good at keeping themselves safe to a point. And I think that's what we've got to remember, is that we're not there to rescue, we're there to support. People might not want to change, people might want to do what they do. And we have got to go home and leave, all the worry, all of the work that we've done, we've got to sort of leave it somewhere. I know there was a guy I used to work with, and what he used to do, there was a road sign on the way home, and he used to mentally leave work at that road sign. So as he passed it, he used to sort of drop it off, if you like. Mentally, he used to visualize it and drop it off at that road sign and leave it there until he picked it up the next day on his way past, which I think is a really, really good way to do it. And I think that sort of visual thing's good. The other thing that I love to do as well is, it's probably part of self-soothing, but walking the dog and doing the mindful sort of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So 5 things I can see, 4 things I can touch, 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, 1 thing I can taste. And I describe them and I distract my brain, and it just brings me back to the moment, connects me, grounds me, brings me into nature. So it's just that sort of looking after yourself when you come home after a day's work, and making sure you're not thinking about it, so you get a good night's sleep and you feel resourced to do it all again the next day.
The organisation, they had a flexible working policy.
This is Dave Wall, a former drug and alcohol support worker.
The flexible working policy sort of looks like it only actually really applies to the central office staff. I don't think it, and I get why the knee-jerk reaction is, oh no, you work in a service, we open 9 to 5, you need to be there 9 to 5. I get the logic on that, but the practice on that is just totally different. You could do compressed hours, 9-day fortnight rather than a 10-day fortnight. Requesting. The reason I wanted to do, say, 8 to 4, for example, would mean rather than getting home at, kind of get a bus at 5 o'clock, I'm not getting until 6. If I left at 4, I could be home by 4:30. I'm buying myself a lot of time, and that first hour would have been miles more productive than with nobody else in the office. It wouldn't cost them a penny. It would not cost them a penny. That's just a mentality. That's just we don't do it. That's it. Rather than listening to the case.
So let's win people over one by one. Let's create a movement and work with the early adopters. The early adopters, and then you get then you'll get the laggards, and that's how all implementation takes. I think it's Carl Rogers, not the counsellor, Carl Rogers research in organisational change. The laggards, the people that you want, will eventually adopt what the innovators are doing, and that happens with all policy. So let's go and find the people who want to do this. Let's share that and let's talk about it and publicise it and just get this information with as many people as can. So we need to think about mental health differently. We need to think about human distress differently. We need to think about how we grow and develop people differently. And then we really committed. The organisation spend a lot of time there. Do you really, really want to make that difference? And I think people have got that movement post-lockdown of, I want a good experience at work. I don't want a bad experience. That's changed mindsets. Why people won't commute and travel as far, why people have reduced their working hours, or why people have stopped work and thinking, actually, I don't want to do something distressing. So the future workforce should really focus on this. And I think it'll become the big thing. And the sooner people get involved, the better.
One of the main ways that businesses and agencies have of supporting staff is the basic employee support services. I think most, if not all, professions have them now. Someone you can contact or offer some sort of assistance that are completely independent from the company to give that little bit of distance and assistance there. But what I've found, and this may be just natural suspicion, I don't know, but I've been in so many places where staff are in dire need of that service, of that support, but refuse to access it because they feel it's another way from the company to monitor their actions or behaviour, even though it's completely independent. And it frustrates me. It's understandable to a degree. Although it is a little irrational, but it is understandable. But it frustrates me a lot because I've had to access employee support services in the past. It was a fantastic help for me when I needed to use it. And I would encourage anyone, wherever they feel they need to join it as soon as possible.
For me, there's a complacency about it. Some of the places I worked at, fairly senior staff, I've had conversation with them and said about the employee assistance programs. And they've said, oh yeah, we have them. And I've said, well, what are they? What does it look like to you? How do you access them? How do you tell your staff about them? And you see blank faces on them. They go, oh, wow, I knew we had them, but I never actually thought about how to access them. And there's this almost like this unwritten rule that on your induction, I'll tell you as a manager to you as a staff member that this exists, but I won't actually explain to you in more depth about what it is, why it's part of an organizational culture, why it's there to protect you, why no one hears about it. All organizations hear about with these things is how often they get used, not who is using them. They're completely safe. But if a culture exists that it isn't embedding this effectively, fear will override it. And when you think about this as well, and I think about some of the other examples that people have, is that if it's seen as the only option, so if I'm a manager and I'm so used to turning to my staff member, anytime there's a slight issue going employee assistance program, it then devalues it even further because employee assistance programs should be there as an avenue of support, not the only avenue of support. And this might sound challenging for people who think, oh my goodness, I've got more stuff to think about here. But you've got to put it into context. You've got to think how you sell this. And as you've said, the culture is so important, because if you get it right, and it's there when you need it, brilliant. But if it's not there when you need it, or it's not sold in the right way, the fee will take over and it won't be used. And then people are sat there, senior managers are sat there going, we have this employee assistance programs, no one's using it. And I think it's maybe a good starting point for a lot of organizations. How do you use that? How is it sold? How is the culture built? And how do you make sure that this isn't your only option? It's part of a wider sort of avenue of different places that people can go to and get help and support that they need. A lot of the areas that I'm working on at the minute, one of the common factors seems to be about recruitment processes. How are staff hired, not just in terms of the interview process, but that onboarding process? What does day one look like? What does week one look like? And I want to ask people who are listening to this, who are in management positions, to think honestly, do we talk about things like compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma in week one? Do we talk about how they are responded to proactively and what avenues exist for people to get the support they need? And do you create like effective safety plans with people, really thinking about if something does happen to someone, or you are taking into account some maybe additional challenges or additional needs that they have, or perhaps their own lived experience? Are we having those honest conversations as safely as possible when people start, so that we know what they are dealing with and we know what support they need to flourish? Because again, come back to this idea that this is purely business head on for a second. And we think if we get this stuff right, you will flourish. But the byproduct of this is you will just naturally become a more trauma-informed, caring, compassionate service. And let's be honest, who doesn't want that? Who does not want that?
I think that's as good a place as any to finish at this stage. This has been part 4, the final episode of our Vicarious Trauma deep dive. Really hope you've enjoyed listening to this. It's been an intense labour of love, and I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's contributed to this series today, across the series, not just this episode. This has been Frontline. I've been Andrew James.
And I've been David Gill.
And we'll be back soon with some more episodes for you to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.